Most people misunderstand what empathy really is. They imagine an empath as someone who absorbs everyone else's pain, sacrifices their own needs, and quietly accepts whatever life hands them. Somewhere along the way, kindness became confused with weakness, compassion became associated with passivity, and emotional sensitivity was mistaken for emotional fragility. But those assumptions reveal more about our culture than they do about empathy itself. Real empathy is not the inability to protect yourself. It is the remarkable ability to understand another person's inner world without abandoning your own. That distinction changes everything. An empath notices what others overlook. They hear hesitation behind confident words. They recognize sadness hidden beneath anger. They can often sense fear disguised as control or arrogance. This isn't magic, and it isn't naivete. It is a form of emotional intelligence that develops through careful observation, deep listening, and an unusual willingness to stay present with human complexity. Yet this gift carries a quiet danger. The more accurately you understand other people's pain, the easier it becomes to excuse behavior that should never be tolerated. You begin explaining instead of confronting. You forgive before accountability exists. You convince yourself that someone's difficult childhood, overwhelming stress, or unresolved trauma somehow justifies the way they repeatedly cross your boundaries. Understanding becomes permission, and that is where empathy quietly transforms into self-neglect. There is a profound psychological difference between understanding someone's wounds and volunteering to become the place where those wounds continue to bleed. One reflects compassion, the other reflects the absence of healthy boundaries. Many empaths spend years believing their value comes from fixing people. They become experts at carrying emotional burdens that were never theirs to carry. They believe that if they love enough, remain patient enough, or sacrifice enough, they can inspire someone else to change. But genuine transformation has never worked that way. People change when they become willing to face themselves, not because someone else quietly absorbs the consequences of their choices. One of the most liberating moments in an empath's life arrives when they realize that understanding another person's behavior does not obligate them to endure it. You can recognize someone's pain without accepting their disrespect. You can acknowledge their struggles without surrendering your peace. You can care deeply while refusing to participate in cycles that diminish your own well-being. That realization is not the death of kindness. It is the maturation of kindness. Emotional intelligence is often misunderstood as limitless patience. In reality, emotional intelligence includes discernment. It asks difficult questions. Is this relationship reciprocal? Is this compassion creating healing or enabling avoidance? Am I helping this person grow, or simply making it easier for them to remain exactly as they are? These questions require courage because the answers are rarely comfortable. The strongest empaths are not those who never become disappointed. They are those who learn to separate compassion from responsibility. They stop believing they must rescue everyone they understand. Instead, they recognize that every healthy relationship requires two people willing to do the work. This shift changes the entire emotional landscape. Instead of reacting impulsively to every crisis around them, mature empaths become grounded observers. They respond rather than rescue. They listen without carrying. They support without surrendering themselves. Their kindness becomes intentional instead of automatic. Ironically, this makes them far more compassionate than before. Because compassion without wisdom eventually becomes exhaustion, but compassion guided by self-awareness becomes sustainable. It allows them to remain generous without becoming depleted, loving without becoming dependent, and open-hearted without becoming vulnerable to manipulation. The most dangerous empath is not the one who stops caring. It is the one who finally understands that protecting their own peace is not the opposite of compassion. It is what allows compassion to endure. Once you understand that empathy does not require self-abandonment, something remarkable begins to happen. Your entire relationship with kindness starts to change. You no longer measure your worth by how much you can endure. Instead, you begin asking a far more important question: what does healthy compassion actually look like? For many empaths, this question arrives only after disappointment. Not one disappointment, but a pattern. A series of relationships where generosity was mistaken for availability, where patience became permission, where understanding became an invitation for others to continue taking without ever learning to give. There is a painful irony in this experience. The people who are most willing to understand others are often the least understood themselves. They become the emotional refuge for everyone around them, yet they quietly carry the weight of feeling unseen. They remember birthdays, notice changes in mood, offer reassurance without being asked, and create spaces where others feel safe. But when they need that same care in return, the silence can be deafening. Eventually, something inside them begins to shift. Not because they become cynical, but because they become honest. They realize that love without reciprocity is not generosity. It is imbalance. They recognize that constantly giving to people who never intend to meet them halfway is not evidence of a beautiful heart. It is evidence that they have confused compassion with obligation. This realization is uncomfortable because it forces them to examine a difficult truth. Sometimes saying yes to everyone else has been another way of saying no to themselves. Psychologically, boundaries are often misunderstood. Many people imagine boundaries as walls designed to keep others out. In reality, healthy boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They allow you to decide who enters your emotional world, under what conditions, and with what level of trust. A wall isolates, a boundary protects. There is profound wisdom in that distinction. A person without boundaries eventually becomes resentful, even if they continue smiling. They begin to feel emotionally drained, not because they care too much, but because they care without structure. Every request feels urgent, every conflict feels personal, every person's pain becomes their responsibility. No human being can carry that weight indefinitely. The mature empath learns something revolutionary. Caring for someone does not mean becoming responsible for the consequences of their choices. Supporting someone does not require rescuing them from every discomfort. In fact, constantly removing the natural consequences of another person's behavior often prevents genuine growth from ever taking place. Growth demands responsibility, and responsibility cannot be borrowed. This is why boundaries are not acts of rejection. They are acts of respect. Respect for your own emotional energy. Respect for the other person's ability to become accountable. And respect for the relationship itself, because relationships built on endless sacrifice eventually collapse under the weight of unspoken resentment. There comes a moment when the empath stops apologizing for needing rest. They stop explaining every decision that protects their peace. They become comfortable with disappointing people whose expectations were built upon unlimited access to their time, attention, and emotional labor. Interestingly, this transformation often surprises everyone except the empath. Those who benefited from limitless access may accuse them of changing. They may call them distant, cold, or selfish. But what has truly changed is not their kindness. What has changed is their availability to unhealthy patterns. There is an important philosophical truth hidden here. Not everyone who is upset by your boundaries is harmed by them. Sometimes they are simply inconvenienced because the version of you they depended upon no longer exists. That distinction matters. Real kindness is never measured by how much of yourself you sacrifice. It is measured by the integrity with which you show up, fully present, emotionally honest, and free from quiet resentment. The strongest relationships are not built on endless accommodation. They are built on mutual respect, where both people recognize that love flourishes not in the absence of boundaries, but because of them. The empath who learns this no longer fears saying no. They understand that every healthy no protects a more meaningful yes to peace, to self-respect, and to relationships where kindness is freely given rather than quietly extracted. And in that moment, kindness ceases to be a vulnerability. It becomes a form of strength that cannot be manipulated. When an empath reaches this stage of growth, something subtle yet profound takes place. From the outside, it may appear as though they have become quieter, more reserved, perhaps even more distant. But beneath that calm exterior is not emotional withdrawal. It is emotional mastery. There is a common belief that strength is measured by how forcefully we respond to those who hurt us. We celebrate dramatic confrontations, clever comebacks, and public victories. We imagine that justice is found in making someone else feel the pain they caused us. Yet life reveals a different truth. The deepest form of power rarely announces itself. It simply changes the direction of your energy. The most dangerous empath is not dangerous because they seek revenge. They are dangerous because they no longer allow their inner world to be governed by the behavior of others. This is a profound psychological shift. Earlier in life, every criticism may have lingered for days. Every rejection felt like a reflection of personal worth. Every misunderstanding demanded an explanation. The empath believed that if they could only make others understand their intentions, harmony would return. But maturity teaches a quieter lesson. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Some people will misunderstand your boundaries because they benefited from your lack of them. Others will project their own fears, disappointments, or insecurities onto you because it is easier than confronting themselves. And no amount of explaining can create understanding in someone who has already decided not to listen. Recognizing this is not an act of hopelessness, it is an act of liberation. The mature empath stops investing emotional energy where there is no willingness to receive it. They learn that closure does not always come from another person's apology. Sometimes closure is the moment you stop expecting one. That is not bitterness, it is freedom. Philosophically, this reflects one of life's most difficult truths. Peace is not created by controlling external circumstances. It is created by developing an inner stability that remains intact even when circumstances refuse to cooperate. This does not mean becoming indifferent. The empath still feels deeply. They still care about people. They still recognize suffering with remarkable sensitivity. But now those emotions are anchored instead of scattered. They no longer absorb every conflict as if it belongs to them. They no longer carry guilt for choices they did not make or responsibility for lives they cannot control. Their compassion becomes deliberate rather than automatic. Their silence becomes intentional rather than fearful. Their presence becomes steady rather than reactive. Ironically, this version of the empath often has a greater impact on the people around them than the version who constantly tried to save everyone. Why? Because genuine influence has never come from sacrificing yourself. It comes from embodying the qualities you hope to inspire in others. Calm invites calm, integrity inspires integrity, self-respect teaches others how to respect you. People begin to notice that this empath no longer chases approval. They no longer argue to prove their worth. They no longer shrink themselves to make others comfortable or enlarge themselves to earn acceptance. Their confidence is no longer built on being needed. It is built on knowing who they are, regardless of how others respond. There is an extraordinary peace in reaching that place, It is the peace of realizing that your value was never determined by your usefulness, that your kindness was never meant to become your identity at the expense of your humanity, that loving others and honoring yourself are not competing priorities, they are inseparable parts of the same whole. Perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. The empath becomes most powerful not when they harden their heart, but when they stop abandoning it. They protect it with wisdom instead of fear. They offer it with discernment instead of desperation. And because of that, they become impossible to manipulate, not because they have stopped loving, but because they have finally learned that love without self-respect is not love at all. So if there is one idea worth carrying with you beyond this conversation, let it be this. The most unbreakable kindness is not the kind that gives until nothing remains. It is the kind that stands firmly in truth, protects its own peace, and continues to love without ever losing itself.